Imagine you are standing on a ridge in the northern mountains of the Philippines. You are looking down at what people call the eighth wonder of the world, the Ifugao Rice Terraces. They are staggering. Thousands of emerald green steps carved directly into the near vertical mountainsides. They have been there for over 2,000 years. If you laid these walls end to end, they would stretch halfway around the equator. It is a masterpiece of prehistoric engineering, built by hand, stone by stone, mud by mud. It looks like a staircase leading straight to the clouds. But then, you step closer, you hear a sound that shouldn't be there. A gurgling, a trickling. You look at the ancient walls of one of the terraces and you see water spurting out from a hole in the mud. Then, with a sickening squelch, a piece of the 2,000-year-old wall just slumps into the valley below. The masterpiece is falling apart. It is leaking. It is crumbling. And the strangest part, the villain of this story isn't a giant earthquake or a massive volcanic eruption. It is not even a violent civil war. The villain is a worm. A giant, squirming, hungry worm. And the reason that worm is currently chewing its way through a World Heritage Site might actually be the wooden coffee table sitting in your living room right now. This is a story about the ultimate ecological domino effect. It is a story about how a lie told by furniture salesmen in the 1950s created a biological monster that is eating the heart out of an ancient civilization. Let us start with the monster itself. If you think an earthworm is just a tiny, pink, harmless thing that comes out after the rain, you have clearly never been to the province of Ifugao. These are called Pheretima worms, and they are the stuff of nightmares. They are not pink. They are blue-gray and purple. They can grow to be over a foot long and as thick as a human thumb. They don't just slowly move through the soil, they muscularly tunnel through it. In a normal environment, these worms are great. They aerate the soil. They help create rich compost. But on the rice terraces of Banawe, they are a death sentence. The rice terraces are essentially a series of massive mud tanks. The farmers use the mud to create watertight seals that hold the irrigation water for the rice. If the mud stays intact, the terrace stays strong. But the Pheretima worms are currently performing a slow-motion demolition. They tunnel into the mud walls, creating thousands of tiny secret pipes. The water from the fields follows these tunnels. It starts as a leak. Then the leak becomes a hole. Then the hole becomes a cavern. Eventually, the water pressure gets so high that the entire terrace wall just blows out. In the last few decades, hundreds of these ancient walls have simply vanished into the mud. For years, the local people were baffled. They had lived with these terraces for 80 generations. They knew every insect. They knew every bird. So why, all of a sudden, did these giant worms start showing up in the rice fields like an invading army? The farmers tried everything. They tried traditional medicines. They tried imported pesticides. They even tried catching them one by one. But the worms kept coming. Millions of them. This is where the mystery gets deep. Because when scientists actually studied these invading worms, they realized something shocking. The worms were not invaders, they were locals. They had been living in the mountains of Luzon for thousands of years, but they were never supposed to be in the rice fields. They were forest creatures. They were supposed to live in the deep, damp soil of the old-growth rainforest that covered the mountain peaks above the terraces. In the forest, the worms stayed hidden under the massive trees. The forest floor was like a giant, cool sponge that stayed wet all year round. The worms were happy there. They had plenty of leaf litter to eat and plenty of shade. But if the worms were happy in the forest, why did they move into the farmers' fields? The answer is simple and terrifying. The forest was gone. Now we have to go back in time to the 1950s. Imagine a family in a quiet suburb in Ohio or a newly rebuilt apartment in Tokyo. The war is over. The economy is booming. Everyone wants a new house, and every new house needs a nice dining room table. People wanted something that looked exotic, something that looked expensive. They wanted mahogany. True mahogany is a very specific tree that grows in Central and South America. It is heavy, it is beautiful, and by the 1950s, it was becoming incredibly rare and expensive. But businessmen are clever. They looked across the ocean to the Philippines, and they found a group of trees called loan. To a regular person, loan looks a lot like mahogany. It has that same deep reddish-brown color when you stain it. It has a beautiful grain. But biologically, it is a completely different species. It is softer, it is lighter. And at the time, there were billions of these trees covering the islands of the Philippines. The furniture industry came up with a genius marketing lie. They started calling this wood Philippine mahogany. It was a total scam, but it worked. Millions of people bought chairs, tables, and cabinets made of Philippine mahogany, thinking they were getting the real deal for a bargain price. Between the 1950s and the 1980s, the Philippines became one of the world's biggest exporters of timber. Loggers moved into the mountains of northern Luzon with chainsaws and tractors. They didn't just pick a few trees. They clear-cut entire mountain ranges. They stripped the sponge off the top of the mountains to satisfy the demand for mid-century modern furniture in the West and the rebuilding of Japan. This is where the dominoes really start falling. When you cut down the forest at the top of a mountain, you aren't just taking away the trees. You are destroying the air conditioning and the plumbing for everything living underneath. Without the trees to provide shade and hold the moisture, the soil on the mountain peaks began to dry out. The cool, damp sponge became a hard, dusty desert. And for the giant Pheretima worms, it was a catastrophe. Their home was dying. They were literally being baked alive in the drying soil. So they did what any refugee would do. They went looking for water. They crawled down the mountainside, away from the dry, dead forest, until they reached the only place left that was still wet. The rice terraces. For the worms, the rice terraces were paradise. They were full of damp, nutrient-rich mud. There was no hot sun because of the rice stalks. It was a giant, man-made oasis. They moved in by the millions. But because there were so many of them in such a small space, they started doing exactly what they were designed to do. They dug, they tunneled. They turned the watertight mud walls into Swiss cheese. The Ifugao farmers, who had spent 2,000 years perfecting the art of mountain irrigation, suddenly found themselves fighting a ghost. Every time they patched a hole, 10 more appeared. The water that was supposed to grow their food was instead being used by the worms to undermine their homes. And the irony is almost too much to bear. The people of Ifugao are legendary for their forest management. They have a system called the Muyong. Each family owns a small patch of forest above their terraces. They selectively harvest trees and plant new ones. They treat the forest like a sacred garden because they know the forest is what provides the water for the rice. For 2,000 years, their system was perfectly sustainable. They protected the trees protected the water grew the rice, and the rice fed the people. But their small family forests were no match for the industrial-scale logging of the 21st century global economy. The Philippine mahogany craze was like a giant vacuum cleaner that sucked the life out of the mountains, leaving the traditional farmers to deal with the mess. But wait, the story gets even more complicated. It is not just about the furniture. As the forests disappeared and the worms moved in, the hydrology of the entire region began to shift. Without the forest, sponge, to soak up the monsoon rains, the water started rushing down the mountains, all at once. The floods became more violent. The dry seasons became drier. The delicate balance that kept the terraces stable for 20 centuries was shattered. When the terraces start to leak, they become harder to farm. When they become harder to farm, the young people in the villages start to look for other ways to survive. They don't want to spend 18 hours a day shoveling mud in a field that might collapse at any moment. They move to the cities like Manila or Baguio, or they take jobs in call centers or factories. They stop learning the ancient techniques for maintaining the walls. This creates a secondary collapse. The rice terraces aren't just a natural feature. They are a living machine that requires constant human maintenance. Without enough people to keep the walls patched and the irrigation channels clear, the decay accelerates. More leaks lead to more collapses, which lead to more people leaving, which leads to more decay. It is a spiral into oblivion. Today, UNESCO has listed the rice terraces as an endangered site. They are pumping in millions of dollars in aid. They are trying to find ways to kill the worms without poisoning the water. They are trying to convince the youth to stay and preserve their heritage. But how do you fight a global economic history that has already been written? The mahogany table in your living room might look beautiful. It might have a history and a story of its own. But in the grand invisible web of global trade, that table is connected to a giant purple-gray worm that is currently chewing through a world wonder. Your taste in interior design in 1960 might have been the final blow to an engineering feat that survived the Roman Empire, the Spanish colonization, and World War II. This is what we mean when we talk about the butterfly effect. In a globalized world, we often think of global trade as a series of neat, clean transactions. You give me money, I give you wood. But in reality, every transaction is a biological and ecological event. When we demand cheap mahogany, we aren't just buying wood. We are reordering the underground life of a mountain range 5,000 miles away. We are forcing millions of worms to become refugees. We are turning a stairway to heaven into a pile of mud. It is a sobering thought, but it is also a reminder of the incredible power we have as consumers. We often feel small in the face of climate change or environmental destruction. But the story of the rice terraces shows that our smallest choices, the things we choose to buy, the stories we believe in advertising, have massive, echoing consequences. Is there any hope? Some. There are young Ifugao activists who are coming back to the mountains. They are using drones to map the collapses. They are working with biologists to find natural predators for the Pheretima worms. They are trying to create a new traditional economy where they can sell their heritage rice at a premium to pay for the maintenance of the walls. They are trying to rebuild the forests, one tree at a time. But it is a race against the clock, and the worms never sleep. This brings us to a weird, dark irony that sums up our modern era perfectly. We travel halfway around the world to take selfies at the Ifugao Rice Terraces. We buy souvenirs. We tell our friends about the incredible beauty of ancient civilizations. And then we go home and sit at our mass-produced desks, never realizing that the things we buy are the very things destroying the wonders we claim to love. The eighth wonder of the world is bleeding water. It is losing its foundation, and it is happening because of a series of choices made by people who thought they were just buying a nice piece of furniture. We didn't mean to destroy the terraces. We didn't mean to unleash the worms. But that is the problem with a globalized world. We are connected in ways that we can't see. Through our stuff, through our food, and through the tiny squirming things under our feet. The Pheretima worms are just doing what they have always done, looking for a home. The Ifugao people are just doing what they have always done, trying to protect their ancestors' work, and the rest of us are just doing what we have always done, looking for a bargain. But when these three things collide on the mountainsides of northern Luzon, the results are catastrophic. So the next time you go furniture shopping, don't just look at the price tag. Ask about the wood. Ask where it came from. Because somewhere out there, a giant purple worm might be waiting to hear your answer, and an ancient, emerald green stairway to the clouds might be depending on it. The silence of the rubber forests, the buzz of the honeybees, the hunger for guano, the theft of the rubber seeds, and the migration of the giant worms. All of these stories are the same story. They are the story of how our appetite for the exotic and the efficient has rewired the biology of our planet. We have turned the earth into a giant factory, but we forgot that a factory needs a maintenance crew. We forgot that if you break the forest, you break the water. If you break the water, you break the culture. And if you break the culture, the wonders of the world will simply slide back into the mud from which they came. The story of the rice terraces is not over yet. The walls are still standing. For now, the farmers are still in the fields for now. But the leaks are getting bigger. The worms are getting hungrier. And the world is still hungry for mahogany. We need to start listening to the sounds of the trickling water. We need to hear the warning of the worms, because once the stairway to heaven is gone, no amount of furniture will ever be able to replace it. Let's hope we can find a way to fix the sponge before the whole mountain collapses. Let's hope we can learn to appreciate the lowly things like worms and mud before it's too late. And let's hope that the next time someone tells us a bargain is just like the real thing, we stop and ask what the real cost actually is. Because usually it is much, much higher than the price on the tag. It is a price measured in mud, in history, and in the survival of our most beautiful human dreams. Stay curious, stay questioning, and always check under the table. You might be surprised at what you find. History is not just in the past, it is being written right now, in the choices we make every single day. The worms are waiting. The terraces are watching, and the world is listening for your next move.